Hi, you're watching theAnalysis-news, and I'm your host, Talia Baroncelli. This is part 2 of my conversation with sociologist Sari Hanafi. If you enjoy this content and would like to help us out, you can go to our website, theAnalysis.news, and hit the donate button at the top right corner of the screen. Make sure that you're on our mailing list. That way you receive a message every time we release content and publish episodes. You can also like and subscribe to the show on YouTube or on Spotify or Apple or wherever else you watch or listen to the show. See you in a bit with Sari Hanafi. Joining me now is Dr. Sari Hanafi. He is a professor of sociology at the American University in Beirut, and he was previously the editor of Idafat, the Arab Journal of Sociology. He was also formerly the president of the International Sociological Association. He has written numerous articles on the situation of Palestinians in the refugee camps in Lebanon, as well as analyzing the various tactics used by Israel in its occupation and spatiocide of Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza. And he's also written on the role of religion and religiosity in Arab societies. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Hello, Talia. Yeah, with a pleasure to be with you.
It's great to have you. So I definitely wanted to ask you about UNRWA, which is the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, which provides services to Palestinians not only in the occupied territories, but also in refugee camps in Lebanon and in Jordan. And I think it's worth noting that UNRWA was created in 1949 and was then made operational in 1950, which was before the Geneva Conventions on Refugees. So before the whole idea of giving the right to asylum to individuals was conceived by the international community, or by at least the countries at the time who were considered to be nation states and who could make legal decisions on the international stage. So as a result of this, it means that Palestinians can't get any sort of protection or assistance outside of the UNRWA framework, meaning that they can't just go to, say, a European country like Germany and Italy and apply for asylum as other asylum seekers would. So they're not entitled to the same sort of international protection that, say, a Syrian asylum seeker would be. They can't apply for asylum under the Refugee Convention of 1951. And so some people argue that this reproduces certain inequalities of access to international protection, and this is all tied around the conditions of the right to return. So aside from that, how would you say that Western institutions and Israel and the United States in defunding UNRWA are actually actively starving the Palestinians because of the very important role that UNRWA has traditionally played on the ground?
It's an excellent question. I would say exactly like 7 October, this resistance actions with its some atrocity inside that always morally we can criticize it, cannot be understood as a gangs invade place. No, it's you understand it if you started thinking from 1948 of this apartheid state, about this settler colonial state, particularly since 1967, and so on. So the same thing I would say for the UNRWA. UNRWA is a protracted campaign against UNRWA from Israeli authorities in the last 30 years. Again, why 30 years? It's a slow process. It's a time where Israeli afraid that that any imposed solution on refugees. So what the Israeli wanted to do is to eliminate the question of refugees. For the Israeli, there is no refugee problem. If you want to open two brackets, I do remember a friend of mine, an Algerian who was an important officer, the head of Cairo office for UNHCR, who told me, and sometimes in a cynical way, to say, look, an African come to Cairo just 1 week, we can help him, but we cannot help a Palestinian in Egypt who whose basic rights has been deprived in the last 30 years or 40 years. So, and again, why I said sometimes cynically, because as an Arab nationalist, he think that giving the Palestinian any civil rights would undermine the right of return. So this kind of zero sum game, if you like, equations, which is a stupid equation. Absolutely. I mean, we can have a socioeconomic rights, we can have even a passport, live properly, but in the same time have the possibility of going claiming the right of return. So to close this parenthesis, so UNRWA is really what you Talia you try to say. It's become like a raison d'être of the refugees. It's inherent part of their identity. So eliminating this will eliminate the identity of Palestinian refugees. So Israel grabs this occasion of Gaza and the solidarity of all this politically class in the West to say, let us do things we cannot do it in the past. So a massive killing in West Bank, and always you see how funny Europe and United States, that they put 3-4 names of settlers in their release for a financial sanction. What you are talking about? That there is a deliberate mass killing against a Palestinian in West Bank. You have, since October, you have 460 Palestinians killed in West Bank. So Israel, to summarize what I said before, is really targeting UNRWA, at least in the last 30 years, and they want to eliminate this marker of Palestinian identity, if you like. And without talking about how functional UNRWA in providing education and health for Palestinian refugee problems, people maybe they don't know that now we have the 4th generation of Palestinians in country like Lebanon, where Palestinian refugees, they don't have the right to work or to own properties. So they are really in a terrible socioeconomic situation. So UNRWA is extremely instrumental on that. And if you remember UNRWA during the President war on Gaza, 2007, 2009, 2011, all UNRWA was who were in charge of receiving materials, food during the bombardment, but also later on about reconstruction of Gaza. So Israel wanted to delegitimize all the potential actors in Gaza Strip, Palestinian authorities, but also UNRWA. So it means that leave it without governance. Of course, what they are dreaming, that they will give the power to the tribes. It means that really play on this divide to rule and to create this, tribal authorities, etc. And definitely it won't work. I mean, I think again they still the Israeli thing that the Palestinian resistance can be vilified as a one organization called Hamas, and Hamas composed with a number of people. We kill these people, and we end with this problem. I mean, they are dreaming. I mean, the Palestinian resistance is an idea. Hamas is an idea, can be regenerated with any actors later on.
Yeah, and something that you've made clear just now is how, for example, UNRWA is so crucial to having the infrastructure on the ground to distribute aid, and not just being this marker of Palestinian identity and, you know, in a way continuing, or its very existence is based on the right of return. So UNRWA is there to ensure or to advocate perhaps for the right of Palestinians to return to the land they were dispossessed from and pushed off of in 1948. But it has a very practical importance on the ground. I mean, UNRWA workers were the ones, the local ones especially, who actually stayed there. The local ones were the people who continued to distribute the aid, because there were lots of foreign UNRWA workers who actually left after October 7th. And Israel has been targeting the civilian officers on the ground and making it very difficult for aid to be distributed. So this is why they suggested or imposed on the Palestinians this port in Gaza to bring in aid that way, which is actually not a very effective way when you can just bring in trucks very easily into the Gaza Strip and have UNRWA and other aid organizations on the ground distribute it. So in a way they've fabricated this issue of not being able to have aid delivered properly. And I don't know if you would agree with this, but Netanyahu also did say that the port was built to potentially voluntarily transfer Palestinians out of the Gaza Strip. So how do you evaluate this particular tactic? I mean, with this tactic of building a port and making it easier to actually ethnically cleanse Palestinians from the Gaza Strip, I mean, does this fit in, do you say, to his calculus of trying to get rid of Palestinians, or was this just a Band-Aid effort to bring more aid in the ways that they wanted to bring aid in?
Look, I would say even before Netanyahu, Rabin once, he said that he dreamed one day he opened his eyes and there is no Gaza people, or Gaza is outside, it's went into sea. So I think they dreamed that this stronghold of Palestinian resistance to be eliminated, and if they cannot eliminate it, it's to transfer the population. So yes, and the port can be a way of facilitating this. I think I was surprised from I have a colleague, a diplomat, who Western diplomat based in Cairo. He told me, seriously, Blinken, in the beginning of the conflict, he espoused this Israeli idea of a transfer of population, and they were negotiating with Egypt, the Americans, the financial cost, the compensation, how much they will eliminate from the debt, international debt that Egypt has against accepting the Palestinian population in Sinai. So it was a serious plan by Israeli establishment, and I think this Palestinian resistance, the Israeli, in any case, they thought. Remember that declaration in the first 2 weeks, where the Israeli Minister of Defense, he said this war is a matter of 1 month or 2 months. Now we are almost 7 months, and they didn't eliminate. Hamas is still the master of the Gaza Strip. So I think,
and they also haven't gotten all the hostages back. I mean, many of the hostages have probably been killed by Israeli bombs or maybe by Hamas as well. We don't know. But if Netanyahu really cared about the well-being of the hostages and bringing them back, then he would ensure that there would be some sort of ceasefire, because we did see that the time in which the most hostages were returned to Israel was when there was a 6-day ceasefire.
Yeah, exactly. So if you like, I think you have this international outrage worldwide, in many places, including in the United States. This sanction against Biden from Michigan, for instance, with 100,000 people non-committed from the Democrat parties. They don't want to vote for Biden. I mean, it changed the direction or the course of the events, and I think this is why it's important what happened. I give you an example where I wanted to say it in the beginning. I forgot. I was really very positively surprised about re-election of George Galloway, in one of the districts of London. Galloway, I looked to his campaign. It was mainly about UK foreign policies and the bias or the colonial nostalgia of the British government, and then he was elected by 16,000 vote, and the second one, who was not elected, took the half, 800 vote, 8,000 vote, and the third 4,000 votes. It means that really even mainstream British people wanted to say, no, we want somebody honest on politics to represent us. And this is really give some hope about, and this is why I see the war, the genocidal war on Gaza, is not a game changer for the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and putting the Palestinian issue on the table after this threat of a full normalization of many Arab countries with Israel. Not only stopping this, but really it's a game changer about how we make an ethical political actions, if you like. Reconnect ethics with politics.
I have so much to ask you still, and I think maybe the next question would be on your research on the Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon, because I think a lot of people see what's happening in a sort of vacuum. They don't really understand the history, and they might not know about the civil war which took place in Lebanon, which was between various factions, but also the Christian Maronites or the Phalangists in Lebanon, as well as various Muslim groups, some groups that were influenced by Syria. Then you had, various Palestinian liberation groups or national liberation groups. And in 1975, there was a horrible massacre in Tal al-Zatar, outside of Beirut, I think the east part of Beirut, in which there was something like a 62-day siege on the Palestinians there. And I believe the siege was led by Christian nationalists, and over 1,500 people in the end were actually slaughtered. So, but this took place in a very specific context, which some people call the golden age of the Palestinian Revolution in Lebanon, from the Cairo Accords in 1969 up until Israel's invasion of Beirut in 1982. So could you perhaps explain why that period was so important, and how the conditions in the refugee camps then were very different to what you identified earlier in the interview as the unemployment and lack of prospects in the refugee camps in Lebanon today?
Yes, actually, you are right to highlight how Lebanon become very important for for the time of for the development, if you like, and the maturing of Palestinian National Liberation Movement, and where PLO, Palestinian Liberation Movement, have been located the headquarters here in Beirut, with all its political and military, if you like, hands. Now, unfortunately, with the Lebanon, with the as a mosaic societies, and with the tension, I would say the civil war in 1975 is not really the only sectarians. I mean, there is a social class dynamics. There is a certain elite who own the economy and distribute the benefit among them, while the other is not. So in this background, you Lebanon in 1975 entered into civil war. Of course, the mighty organized militia in that time was a Christian militia, or the right-wing Christian militia, if you like. And then what make the counterbalance is the entering of the Palestinian factions in favor of the nationalist and socialist group in Lebanon. So this is where create a problem later on, that some Lebanese, let's say half of Lebanese, they don't want to give the Palestinians any rights because they were involved in the civil war. But this is a half of Lebanese, if you like. The other half is of course, they were happy that the Palestinians support the national progressist movement. So in this backdrop, if you like, it become very difficult to advance on any front of socioeconomic and civil rights for Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. So you end up, as I said previously, they don't have the right to own property, to work, to compose associations. They are in a very slummy refugee camps, which lack basic environmental conditions, very crowded. I mean, these camps is 1 kilometer square each, and of course the population is increasing demographically. So this is why there is really a real problem today about these refugees, and in a country like Lebanon. And I think this is why the Palestinians still seeking for a national liberation solution, national liberation that can be taking the form of one state, two state solutions, and of course the possibility of the Palestinian refugees to have the choice, if not only, I would say, right of return, but the choice to be settled, to be in third countries, and so on. So all these dynamics can be unleashed by a national project. And today, of course, some countries like Spain, like Ireland, like Portugal, Australia, who said they are ready to recognize a Palestinian state. Okay, I mean, I'm happy for that, but if you like, even the American today, they try to say to Saudis. I mean, the last conversation Blinken has with the Saudis say, what about recognizing Palestinian state, but without borders, without frontier? Well, so imagine, I mean, without border, it means that it's nothing. I mean, the whole problem of Palestinian National Authority today that they govern on small islands, if you like, small territories here and there with disintiguity, and it's a like of a municipal power. So without the idea of sovereignty, without idea of a borders, doesn't have this meaning that the Palestinian state, if you like, because the question of Palestinian refugee is very important. I mean, the Palestinian state should accommodate those who are unable to continue living in this inhuman condition in the Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon.
There are a few things there that I want to pick up on. I mean, you're saying that without borders, without a nation-state borders, that there could be no sovereignty. But I mean, that's saying that Palestinians can only have independence or some sort of freedom and integrity within the confines of a nation state. And I know that a nation state, of course, would afford certain privileges, certain securities, but it might not address all of the issues, because you already also mentioned the elite structures and neoliberal decision-making in, the Palestinian Authority, in different governmental structures. So how do you reconcile the two? I mean, could it be possible to have other forms of integrity and independence outside of the nation state in ways which perhaps would escape neoliberal confines?
Well, one of my writing, I wrote about what I called flexible extraterritorial nation states. So, if you like, until today, nation state is not only important for the question of sovereignty. It's important for the question of citizenship. I mean, the idea of citizen. And until today, even Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Talia, when you say no discrimination on the basis of ethnicity, etc., or thinking that you have a state, a sovereign state, which will enforce this no discrimination. So, if you like, even this idea of humanity, equality, liberty, you need a state to reinforce it. Beyond whether this is a communist state, a neoliberal state, socialist state, etc. So, if you like, the state is important. We should not throw the baby with the bathwater. I mean, I think the way nation state, they become authoritarian, they become problematic, they become neoliberal, etc. But nevertheless, the idea of state is important for reinforcing the citizen rights. So, if you like, if you ask me my opinion, I am in favor of finding a one-state solution, Palestine Israel for all its citizens. They live here, one man, one vote. Okay, of course, the Israeli Zionist project, they don't want that, and now the veering toward the right wing side in Israeli society, definitely they don't want one state solution with the Palestinians. So in that case, let's have two-state solutions. However, within this two-state solution, you can envisage the mobility of population and the possibility of double allegiances and the possibility of working in some place and living in other place. So you can mitigate this tough idea of nation state, where the Trinity territories, people, and the state or government are closely combined. That, if you like, you can allow some kind of a fluidity. This is often we find it in frontier area. If you take many cities, border cities in Europe, for instance, population they work on a suite. For instance, I forgot the name of the city, but people. But as a puzzle, exactly. Puzzle, for instance, it's a typical case where people there is a regulation where they pay taxes, but then they have the possibility of mobility, etc. So this is if you like, we need a kind of national liberation conceptualization. I mean, imagination. I mean, that is go against any tough nation state models. But the idea that you need a sovereignty is very important, whether in a two-state solution or in one-state solution.
There was something very interesting you said at the beginning where you said you're opposed to some forms of post-colonial studies, and I know that some scholars have criticized various forms of post-colonial studies, saying that it sort of puts them in a box, that the only way they can respond is within those same colonial terms that European colonizers imposed on them, and the only way to get out of it is to use those same terms which categorizes them according to certain hierarchies. So I'm just wondering if your criticism is along those lines, or why you would perhaps be opposed to certain strains of post-colonial studies.
Thank you. This is a very good question. Look, first of all, I am not against post-colonial theory. I mean, I think the remnants of this division of labor in knowledge production, in academia, in media, still at certain extent influencing how people look to the other. I mean, how the Orient is constructed, imagined, etc. However, I am criticizing post-colonial discourse, if you like. How I saw during the Arab Spring, people they would support authoritarian regime like Syrian regime because it's if you like, allying with a resistance movement like Hezbollah. So something they don't want to see that it's very important for the population is not only they're resisting imperialism, but resisting authoritarianism, which has its own internal dynamics. So this post-colonial discourse has two features. First one is focusing too much on imperialism without seeing the emerging of empires, Iran as empires, Turkey as empires, United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia as empires. And these are local, but they are playing a role so much in supporting some elite formation, supporting the regime, supporting repression, and so on. So this is my first. The second is sometimes the discourse create this us and them, that the West versus us, and I think this dichotomy is not always useful. As simple as that. I mean, I don't want in the name of post-colonial theory to replace French sociology with Arab sociology. It's not like this. I see today, in order to understand my social reality, how I can use Marx and Ibn Khaldun to complement each other in order to understand the political system or political economy, and not to say either Ibn Khaldun or the other. Today, for instance, with my students, we have a major debate about universality of Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They want, because of how they saw with the Euro-American reaction supporting genocide in Israel, they want to throw the universality of Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So all what I claim today, that how we can disentangle this Universal Declaration of Human Rights, like as a very important document to produce through consensus where everyone participate on it, including the rapporteur, who is Charles Malik, who used to have this office where I am now, where is my office, and so how to disentangle this beautiful document from the Western power as a guardian of this, or Western referentiality, or guardian of this document. Today, if you ask me, the guardian of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is not anymore France, Germany, United States. It's Gambia, who thought about Rohingya. It's South Africa, who think about Palestinians. It's Chile. It's Nicaragua. So it's a very interesting. It's a Latin America and Africa now the custodian of the universality of Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So this is where this is where I introduce this nuance and to say you don't understand today the academic knowledge production if you don't supplement the post-colonial approach by anti-authoritarian approach. How there is a local elite become so authoritarian, disconnected whether the colonial power support them or not, and they are playing so important role, for instance, in knowledge production. I see in the Arab world how our universities is full of censors and self-censorship. People are afraid to talk about many issues. Do you expect now there is a political sociology in Egypt? Is it because of the post-colonial studies, or because of the authoritarianism in this country? This is how I try to problematize how we used and abused post-colonial studies.
Right, and I think perhaps one of the largest aims of imperialism is to create categories and then to divide people along those lines. So there's a great effort, and many scholars, post-colonial scholars, have identified the European colonial roots of the current legal system that we have. But if you just stop there, then it's you've succeeded in perhaps deconstructing something, but you're not presenting an alternative, which other scholars, perhaps Marxist scholars, would say lies in taking Marx's work and infusing it with some of the other writers or political scientists that exist right now, to sort of fuse it together to have this critique of elite structures and to show how the law is also used and those standards are sort of weaponized by imperial powers, but those very laws can also be used to bring about a certain form of equality. And as you say, Gambia, Nicaragua, using those standards to turn it on the Western imperialists and on this form of hegemony. So I think it's, as you said, it's inaccurate or perhaps misplaced to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and that we need this sort of multifaceted approach to these studies.
Exactly.
And not just focusing on the specific history of colonialism, but also trying to understand the capital relations which actually drive it and which seek to continue this sort of dividing or tensions between groups, and to give them the impression that the only way that they can fight a certain struggle is to be even more entrenched in their sort of very narrow positions, which is perhaps what imperial powers actually want. So I think it's important to try to go against that and to fuse different perspectives, and not to say one or the other, but to unify all of them and to have a sort of universality that enables solidarity.
Exactly.
Well, Dr. Sari Hanafi, it was really great speaking to you. Thank you for taking so much time to join me today. It was really great.
Thank you. And it was a pleasure.
Thank you for watching theAnalysis.news and for expressing your interest. If you'd like to support us, please visit our website, theAnalysis.news. Thanks for watching.